The Texans fall to the Jets. Why does it feel like Texans football has lost that love and feeling? We're going to talk about all that and more on this edition of The Bullpen.
To throw the punches on. He floats one wide open, and there he goes. Touchdown for a Texan touchdown.
Hello and welcome to The Bullpen. As always, I am James Roy, and with me is Tom Chavarria. Tom, I would ask you how you're doing, but we both watched the Texans and Jets play on Halloween, so probably not too well. But I'll ask anyway. How are you doing?
Physically, I'm good. Spiritually, I'm just a little down. Like my team failed me. You know what I mean? I've lost that love and feeling, like our intro said. This was a game that the Jets did their darndest to try to give the Texans, in stealing one of your lines. I will not give the Jets any credit here. They tried to give the Texans this game, and the Texans did not want it.
Yeah, I remember we had a similar discussion in the Packers game about giving the game and trying to do that, and I see you've come to my side of things on this one. And granted, it's a different game. It's not the exact same game. It did feel similar since it sucked, and I didn't like it, but the Jets were not a very good team. If I was a better host, I would have had the Righteous Brothers Lost That Love and Feeling on one of these pads so that I could hit it and play it when you said it. But I'll get better. I'll get there. But yeah, the big question going into this game was like, why are the Jets favored by one? In some places, 2 points on the Vegas line. That when the Texans are, as I said, I'm going to quote myself here, clearly the better team. That's something that you can find on my Twitter page from mere hours before the game. Embarrassing, I know, but it was true at the time in my head. I don't know what happened between then and now, but let's talk about some of the factors that contributed to this, okay? Because it's important to contextualize that before we really just talk about how frustrated we are with this team. So I'll list a few, and then I'll turn it over to you, and we can kind of hash it out. Injuries. There's quite a few players injured, some linebackers missing. Dameon Pierce missed the game. Jimmy Ward has been a noted absence. As much as some people might not agree with that, I said at the beginning of the season that Jimmy Ward's health was going to be a huge factor on how this Texans defense played. You can look at the offensive line. You can look at scheming on offense. You can look at maybe CJ Stroud's not making some of the same throws that he did last year. There's a lot of different things. Maybe too much is being asked of Jalen Petrie. Just a lot going on, but I'm going to turn it over to you. What are some things, in your opinion, that are contributing to the Texans maybe not being as good of a football team as was expected going into this season?
Well, first, I'm going to speak on what you put on the table. And for me, I thought the linebacker position was going to be a big area of concern going into the season. So far, the guys that they have either brought in off the street in Devin White or have been called into duty because of injuries, in the case of Neville Hewitt and Jake Hansen, have been very good. I've got no issues with the linebacking core. Henry To'oTo'o came back this game. He played well. Also, I felt the linebackers did fine. The safety conversation, that was a big point of conversation going into the season too. What was Jalen Petrie going to be? I thought Jalen Petrie, for all intents and purposes, played a good football game. I think Eric Murray has been serviceable in his, tour of duty while he's been in and out because of injury. Kalen Bullock, rookie, we're dealing with the growing pains. I think he's been really good. He leads the team in interceptions. Got no issue with that at all. The play calling. I have a huge issue with Bobby Slowick right now and this play calling. I feel like it is the bane of my existence. The more I watch this Texans team, it's just bothering me how bad some of these design plays are in trying to protect your quarterback. I understand on paper they have an offensive line that should be able to protect their quarterback. Through 9 games now, I don't know that I felt great about the protection for CJ Stroud all season long. So if that's not a thing that they can fix, even though D'Amico Ryans has said after every game, hey, we're going to fix it. We're going to fix it. We're going to fix it. And we've seen now people have gone after Kenyon Green and said he was the problem. He was the problem. Well, in this game, Kenyon Green gets hurt in the first quarter, and after he leaves the game, the Texans give up 6 sacks. So I'm tired of people all of a sudden going, this is it. This is the only problem. You have problems with Titus Howard. You have problems with Shaq Mason. You have problems with Juice Scruggs. I would say Jaret Patterson was a potential solution, but he has a problem staying healthy. And then you're going to get Laramie Tunsil's obligatory, penalty here, there, wherever, and then suspect, you know what I mean? Like, Bobby Stokes got to do a better job of managing this offensive line and finding ways to protect CJ Stroud, because he is your franchise player and he has the ability to make plays for you. And if that means you need to max protect. I'm tired of seeing 2 tight ends, and one's Cade Stover, who's a rookie, maybe better right now, not a good blocker, and Dalton Schultz, not a good blocker. It's just you're asking these guys to do things that they cannot do. So for me, that's on Bobby Slowick. I think he's got to drop a better game plan, and that is where I am with what's wrong with the Texans.
I couldn't agree more with pretty much all your points. I mean, I'll trace back through what you said. But one thing that stuck out to me was the discussion around the 3 guards that played. So for full reference, and I'll cite PFF here because it matches the eye test. Kenyon Green had an 8 on PFF from what little time he played on his grade. The highest grade that a Texans guard got during that entire game was 39, which I believe was Shaq Mason. And since you and I are both veterans, I'm gonna go to it this way. But civilian triage and military triage are different, and I think that this calls for military triage. You look at the 3 players that are playing interior offensive line, and you're Nick Caserio. You can't replace all 3 of them. There's too many assets invested. You have to look at what can get you better quicker. And so with military triage, it's okay, fix whoever's the most useful first. And so maybe I got that in the wrong order. I thought I didn't think this through. I'm going to continue with my train of thought, though. Maybe the metaphor doesn't work. We'll see. But I think that Shaq Mason very obviously is someone you just don't touch. I mean, right guard is going to be whatever it is. If that's your weak link, that's acceptable, I think. Now, Juice Scruggs, you could put Jaret Patterson at center, who has shown to play better in the past, and try that out. That's something that you can do that's on the roster. And then you go and you shift over to left guard, and that is what I would address from off the roster. Some names that have been thrown around include Wyatt Teller from the Browns, who I think might be the best solution, but also the most costly. And I think that feeds into maybe moving into our next topic of discussion, because I feel like you pretty adequately discussed the blame from a general perspective. We'll definitely touch on more of those topics as we move through our discussion. But looking at the trade deadlines tomorrow, at not at time of recording, but at time that this is going to be released. And so the trade deadline is going to be very telling. If the Texans go into the trade deadline and they trade for Wyatt Teller, this is a team that's serious about contending. And they'll probably make other trades to address other perceived issues on the team, or at least to give themselves options to gear up going into the final stretch of the season. If this team does not do anything at the trade deadline, Houston, prepare yourself for another wild card or divisional round exit at that point. I mean, obviously things could change. Maybe D'Amico is right to believe that the answer is in-house, and that's why they're not going to do anything outside. And in week 18, I'll play this clip at the beginning of an episode, and I'll say, look at that idiot that thought that this team wasn't going to be good now that they're entering the conference championship round of the playoffs. But for now, that's just how I see it. But Tom, what I want to know from you is, I've talked at length throughout the season about how my concerns with win or loss, the way this Texans team has played, gives me reason to be concerned about their ability to contend in the postseason. Is there anything specifically about this game that's kind of set you down that path? Because it seems like your tone when talking about this team has maybe changed over time, right? I'm not saying since the last episode, but over the past 3 or 4 weeks, I would say, which tracks, right? This team has allowed the most QB pressures over the last 3 weeks, over the course of the season, but the downhill starts about 3 weeks ago in terms of drastic fall off in performance. What would you say has happened over that time that's made your train of thought change from like, okay, maybe a win is a win to maybe backing off of that a little bit?
So it's bigger than a trade deadline. It's bigger than one player. It's bigger than 3-player. For me, it's a systemic problem that I have, and for me, it's like the entire offense is struggling because there's the system's bad. Like, you're not going to fix all these players. CJ Stroud is making bad throws. CJ Stroud is not accurate right now. He's missing even when he's not under pressure. For me, that's a problem. Like, we're watching in the at the end of this game, we're going to the back of the playbook, and we're doing a running back pass to CJ Stroud down points. Like, what are we doing? Like, these are things that you can go get all the players you want. And if the guy calling the plays doesn't put these guys where they need to go to be successful, it doesn't matter. And that's my fear. It's not okay, we can go get a wide receiver and that fixes things, or Nico comes back and that fixes things, or the line gets better and that fixes things. Like, there are some serious problems with their ability to generate offense consistently, because they can do it. I mean, they average 20-something points a game. Even with this dud, they can generate offense. And Joe Mixon can run for 100 yards as soon as he falls out of bed. The problem is that when you want to beat upper echelon teams, you have to show ability to be able to attack them and dissect them and find weaknesses and your strength versus their strength, that sort of thing. Right now, you can't just run the ball 50 times. You have to be complementary, and they can't do that. And I don't believe it's CJ. I don't believe it's the tight ends. I don't believe it's the lack of wide receiver depth now that somebody's hurt. I believe this goes all the way to the top, and I don't know how you fix that. I don't think Bobby Slowick's losing his job, and that's a scary thought.
That is, I have other things to say, but it's funny that you end on the Bobby Slowick discussion. There's actually been a discussion on Twitter that the turnaround point for the Lions, at the point where they kind of showed, they flashed, and then they had a falling off, and then it was week 9 of the 2021 season when Ben Johnson took over as play caller, that the Lions really set down the path that they're on, where the way that the Lions play football right now, a win is a win is something I could say, and I honestly probably wouldn't say it, because the Lions just play in a way that it's really good football. It's fun to watch, which we'll talk more about why Texans football is not that right now. But I don't think it's off the table to move from offensive coordinator, and here's why. So I've tracked this train of thought before, and I guess I sounded insane before because we were less on the same page at that point. So I'm going to go through it again. But this goes up to the top. It's like a submarine, right? The captain is liable for everything that happens. Sure, Bobby Slowick is the one who is not running a good offense, and the offensive line are not playing at the level that they need to in order to allow CJ to have time, which has in turn messed with CJ's internal clock and caused him to, even with a good pocket, not be able to make throws that he should be. And so with that, the root cause is the offensive line, in my opinion. I think that if you can fix the offensive line, then everything else will fall into place. But we've reached a point now where, and if you're on Twitter and you follow Young Ari Gold, he was one of the first guests on the Bullpen podcast. They do Texans Unfiltered. That recently started back up. If you've not heard of it, then go check it out. And if you have, you know that it's pretty solid stuff. Texans Unfiltered. But he's been on a rampage on Twitter about a train of thought that I think a lot of people aren't ready to hear, which is that at the end of the day, Slowick can be the issue. But realistically, if Slowick is the issue and it's carried on this long, it's D'Amico that is the issue, because D'Amico is the head coach and it's his job to take corrective action to fix that. And so far, we've not really seen anything happen. And so, and another issue that's brought up with that, which is something that I think a lot of Texans fans scoffed at because of the way the offense functioned with Bobby Slowick. But now that the offense is not functioning with Bobby Slowick, this herein becomes the issue. It's supposed to be an issue for a different reason. This offseason, it was faced because Bobby Slowick was supposed to leave and take a head coach job. Now, how the turns have tabled, but the discussion is still the same. When your head coach is not offensive-minded, your head coach now has to rely on having a really good offensive coordinator to run the offense. And that's different, right? A defensive mind, if you change the defensive scheme a little bit, maybe you lose some players that can't be useful in the new scheme, or maybe you have a new train of thought and players have to buy into it, but it's not as hard as changing offensive scheme. And so with that, when you look at D'Amico being a defensive-minded head coach, you're now faced with the problem of when the offense fails. This is totally different. The offense has just kind of stalled. You now run having to bring in a new offensive mind in order to try and fix the problem. And if you don't, you risk going down on a ship. Like Nico or Miko could end up just going down with the ship because he refuses to move on from Slowick, and he's tied to his offensive coordinator. He has to find someone who can run an offensive scheme because D'Amico, as far as we know, because I don't know if anyone's even asked him. I don't know what D'Amico's involvement is with the offense, but there's former players, and I hate referencing Steven Nelson because honestly the dude's a little bit crazy in a way. But Steven Nelson has outright said that the secondary is an afterthought for D'Amico. This is a cornerback too for the team last year, for those who aren't up to date on that. He's said a lot of stuff about D'Amico and his coaching style, asking players to play through injuries and stuff like that in a recent video. I haven't gotten a chance to really deep dive into it, but that's like the highlights. But with that, since D'Amico not only doesn't do offense, but is also only coaching the front seven, if we're to believe what Steven Nelson is saying, we're now pigeonholed into a point where I love D'Amico as a coach. I think he's a culture setter, but he's very staff dependent. And when the staff fails, what does D'Amico do? That's the thing, is that I saw the look on your face when I said it's a D'Amico problem. And what I mean by that is not like, oh, fire D'Amico, right? What I mean by that is that it requires drastic measures to fix the problem. Once you determine that it is Slowick, you have to move on from him as a coordinator quickly, and you have to basically install a whole new system. If you do that right now, the odd, unless you put Gerard Johnson in as OC, or maybe you don't fire Slowick and you just give Johnson play calling, you're put in a position where you're changing so much so quick in the middle of the season that you go from contender to we'll get them next year. So, like I said, this is not a discussion to call for D'Amico's job, but since it is a D'Amico problem, and there's already all these discussions going on from former players and on the internet about what D'Amico does in the organization, we know from him being a defensive coach that it's unlikely he touches the offense, which means that it is a Slowick problem. But what does D'Amico do to fix that?
So here's the thing. And the reason I was as demonstrative as I was when you said that is because there have been great defensive-minded coaches that have led teams to championships. There's this guy, he was in New England, maybe you heard of him, Bill Belichick. He kind of did it. He was kind of really good.
What was Belichick's involvement? The question that I need answered is what his involvement was in the offense. I'll let you finish. Sorry.
So my thing is, like, who was his offensive coordinator? Can you name all of his offensive coordinators?
Josh McDaniels, no. Bill O'Brien, Matt Patricia.
But I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, did that guy go on to be any, you know what I mean? Like, they weren't necessarily great. And when they had their own teams, they just stunk. It was the players that were better than necessarily scheme. They had a generational quarterback, and he was phenomenal. He made plays. They made things happen. That's, you know what I mean? It didn't need Belichick to go in there and go, I need you out. I need to fix it.
Well, so then that brings up the question. So I've said already, I posted a video on Instagram and I've tweeted about it, that it's bad business decision on the offense's part to watch what happened last year, because in 2023, it was CJ playing hero ball and saving the day when the Texans needed it. And that was it. They just needed CJ to be great at the right moments and the Texans could win football games. That wasn't always it, but for a lot of games, it came down to, can CJ save us? The Bucs game, prime example, back and forth. The Bengals game was a game that definitely shouldn't have been that way, but it became that way, and then CJ played hero ball to save it. The question becomes, is it just that the Texans need to set the offense around CJ being able to play Tom Brady-esque and being elite at all times? And if CJ's not on because of any extra, like right now, I'll tell it to you this way. The way I see it is CJ is having troubles because he's seeing ghosts, as Sam Darnold once said, relevant because we just played the Jets and that's who he was playing for when he said it. Said he was seeing ghosts because of how much he was getting hit. And so CJ maybe is seeing ghosts because he's getting hit so much because the offensive line is inept. And so when that happens and CJ becomes less than because of what's around him, then now the Texans are just useless? Like, is it because and someone said that, Tom Brady, how did you get to Tom Brady? You just had to you had to get through the interior line. Now the Pats built a pretty solid interior line, so that was rarely a problem, but that's exactly what's happening to the Texans is the interior line is useless. So is it that CJ just has to be great for this offense to function, and that's what the issue is right now?
For me, it is. If they're going to overcome what they have in front of them now, CJ has to be great. And part of the problem is CJ Stroud. Nobody wants to talk about it because he's our young GOAT. Nobody wants to have that conversation because CJ's trying to hit home runs instead of taking the singles and the doubles that are laid out in front of him. One of the things that made Tom Brady so great was that he would not have to force the football down the field all the time. He would beat you to death with 5 and 6 yard little tight end screen or little bubble, whatever you want to call that. He would use the run game in the passing game. He would use his running backs out of the backfield. He would nickel and dime you and hurry up offense, and then he'd hit you on the deep one.
Yeah, where's the hurry up, man? We need to get that going.
Right?
Patrick Storm said the offense feels slow at all times.
Well, that was something that we talked about 2 weeks ago where basically CJ was having, I can't remember who put it out there, but somebody was saying that it's not the Texans when they're having hard times getting plays ran. It's not them getting out of the huddle. It's them getting into the huddle, which for me directly relates to maybe a Bobby thing.
Or
maybe they don't agree on play calling. And right now, I can't say enough, like, this is something that potentially CJ can fix himself. Post game, after the game, they wanted to talk all about protection. CJ flat out said, I got to be better. I got to get rid of the ball sooner. And he's right. He can't operate with a 3, 4, 5 second clock. He has to know that the interior offensive line is not good right now, and he needs to start using some of these checkdowns that he's skipping. He's got Dalton Schultz in front of him half the time, wide open, just looking down the field for Tank, looking down the field for Robert Woods, Nico when he comes back. He's in love with those big hits, and I get it. They're great. They're flashy. They work. He's got great wide receivers, but when the offensive line cannot hold it together, this is where they have to change their tactic because they've got a good running game. If they can just keep teams honest, they'll be fine. It's the fact that they won't.
I would say the only thing that's keeping this team together right now is the fact that Joe Mixon is like literally going out of his mind in the run game right now. This is a 6-3 team that probably feels the least like a 6-3 team in a while. I can't remember the last time I looked at a team and said, all right, you know what? Actually, I can. It was this year when the Bears were 4-2. I was like, yeah, all their wins were against 1-win teams. That's not like a juggernaut 4-2 team. And even then, like, I think that there's been points this season where the Bears. No, I'm not going to say that because that's false. The Bears have been pretty trash all season, so I'll leave it at that. But I have a tweet sitting in my drafts right now, and I don't want to say I'm scared to hit send on it. I'm going to test the talking point out here with you, though, since we're on the topic of CJ Stroud, and you said that we need to talk about him in a way that kind of gives him some blame. And that's this. I trace this rabbit hole in my mind, and I need everyone to know before I say this that these are different situations. I understand that. But I'm going to articulate this to see how Tom receives it because I need to bounce it off of Tom because he keeps me sane and keeps me level, lets me know when I say something dumb. So you guys just get to listen to that happen out loud. And so sorry in advance if this is a dumb thought. Right now, we just said, right, root cause of the Texans' offensive issues, the offensive line. And he said all they need to do is get a better offensive line in front of CJ Stroud, give him a pocket, and then he can ball out. If I recall correctly, there's a certain Texan that wears the number 10, and throughout most of his tenure as the starting quarterback of the Texans, the conversation centered around what the Texans needed. If we just got more talent around him, if we just put more pieces around him, then he would be able to be a great quarterback. And we don't need to look in the draft for a quarterback because we just need to put the talent around him. And obviously, I'm talking about Davis Mills. And so with that, when does the discussion around CJ Stroud drift so far into what needs to be around him that it's no longer that CJ Stroud's a great quarterback and it's that CJ Stroud is a product of a system and a team that's built around him? Now, obviously, when you hear that last part said out loud, you're like, that's a dumb thought. That just doesn't make any sense. But that's the way the question is framed in my mind. That's not exactly how the tweet is written, but like I'm just trying to work through that thought process. And so what I'll ask you is this, since I obviously know you don't agree with that thought process, I want you to articulate to me what is the difference between the two situations? What is different between CJ Stroud when we ask for the Texans to put stuff around him and give him the tools to succeed versus in 2021, 2022 when fans were begging the team to put pieces around Davis Mills?
The difference is, man, who did they play? Was it week 1, week 2? CJ Stroud, I think it was week 1.
The Colts?
He hit, yes, the Colts play
Week 1.
on the sideline. Yes. Davis Mills isn't making that throw to end that game, basically. Davis Mills isn't making that throw. The rollout where he hit Tank yesterday, Davis Mills isn't making that throw. CJ makes plays throughout a game, throughout his entire rookie season that just told you 7 is different. Now, there's nothing at all that says that Davis Mills can't be good. There's nothing that says that Davis Mills can't be a winning quarterback on another team. He might be Jared Goff on the bench right now. I'm just saying. He has the tools. We've seen him make some plays. What CJ can do on a football field is totally different. And his accuracy when he's right is totally different. His skill set, there was plays last season that he made, throws that he made to Tank, to Nico, that you're just like, I don't know how he got it there. I don't know how he saw it. Those are the plays that make you think, okay, CJ's this dude. He's different.
No, yeah. That was well said. I don't need to add anything to that. I think that you perfectly countered it because I'm like sitting there. I'm like, I'm probably never going to send this tweet, but I have to have the discussion out loud just to make sure it's as dumb as it sounds in my head. But let's briefly, at least since we're here, talk about what the Jets did, and give them their flowers. So first half, awful. I don't think either team really separated themselves, which is why, and it was said as much with a lot of people around Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers is the kind of quarterback that if you leave the game close and you give him those 4 quarters, in the fourth quarter, he's going to figure it out, and then he's going to tear you apart. And that's pretty much what happened. What would you say was the key to the Jets actually, like, what do you think they did at halftime? What were their adjustments like that made them able to do what they did to the Texans? Do you think they ever actually got good, or do you think the Texans deteriorated in the second half?
It's really tough because I don't want to say the Texans deteriorated. They just struggled to move the football. They just bogged down so much. Defense spent a lot of time on the field. And as good as that defense is, I think it's Super Bowl caliber. You live on the field too long, and teams start making plays. Things start opening up. Garrett Wilson's really good. Devontae Adams is really good. Like, the Jets have tons of talent on paper. And when they finally start clicking a little bit, find a little rhythm, things happen. Aaron Rodgers has been like struggling to kind of find guys, try to find his mojo. He kind of found it a little bit. And when that guy's right, he's an MVP. Like, that's not a question. He's an old MVP, but he's an MVP. So for him to kind of start spinning a little bit, getting in and out of, plays faster and starting to get that rhythm, it's not like that's a knock on the Texans. It's more, okay, when those guys are good, Breece Hall's a really good running back. Like, I don't think they have a deficit of talent. This wasn't like they lost to like Tennessee or Jacksonville or Carolina, where you're just
looking at the team they were talking
about
being a 1 seed in the AFC going into the season. It was obvious. I thought it was an oversell on the team, but I mean, it was supposed to be, Aaron Rodgers is back now. This team's a good team. They weren't supposed to fire their coach, 4 games into the season. But I mean, when you look at what the Jets did, because people talked about the Texans' injuries, the Jets were playing 4 tackles on the offensive line. The Jets had most of their starting secondary out for the game, or had them leave the game during the game. The Jets were going through their fair share of injuries, and through it they persevered. So I mean, props to the Jets for showing up and taking an advantage. I mean, obviously there was early in the game where it felt like the Jets were trying to give it to the Texans. But like you said, I feel like it was more of that atrophy that you see from defenses when they're forced to be on the field a lot due to lack of production from the offense, which is a sentence that I've said before. So I don't feel like I need to elaborate on it. It's been repeated several times. But yeah, I don't know. I felt like we spent most of this episode talking about the issues with the Texans, but I feel like that was always the plan. Just not a great game. One thing I will say is that I'm glad to be out of MetLife without too long of an injury list. I'm interested to see. I'm pretty sure Will Anderson's going to be good. I think he was in and out of the game. They were probably just being cautious with him, I'm pretty sure. But overall, happy to be out of that game. Tom, what are some of your final thoughts before we bring this thing to a close?
The Will Anderson thing, like you said, I think he tweaked his ankle, tried to play through it, went into the halftime locker room, got to sit for a little bit. Thing probably swelled on him a little bit, probably got a little stiff, and they just said, you know what, let's not push it. We need him for December. It's not going to help us October, November. So I feel like that's that. And then you're right. As far as injuries, I think they're overall a whole lot better shape than, say, the Jets, who had a lot of injuries, like you spoke to. I was really frustrated with this game because the Jets really gave the Texans at least 10, maybe 14 points. The turnover, at the one, the touchback, that's a touchdown. The fourth down where, they roughed the kicker, that was potential points. A fourth down where they roughed the center, that was points. There was opportunities for the Texans. This game would have been totally different if Kaimi Fairbairn makes some kicks. I mean, there was just problems all over the place. And normally when they win these games and they have these problems, you live to fight another day. You obviously you realize them, but you take the win. The win is the win, and you go, okay, our record's still good. When they lose them, it just magnifies it. It just makes it worse because now that's one game that you could have had in the division. That's one game you could have had towards the 2 seed, against a team that, for 3 quarters was inferior. They caught fire really in the fourth quarter, scored 14 points, won the game.
Yeah, I mean, just overall rough game. And I know we didn't really talk a lot about special teams, but I guess that for my final comments, how does Steven Sims still have a roster spot when there's so many other players on his team that can return kicks that have not shown to be so inept? I mean, I know that mistake happened on a drive where the Texans drove 98 yards down the field, but they shouldn't have had to have driven 98 yards down the field. And yeah, I mean, it's like, so one of the reasons that I'm always so harsh on the Texans when they do bad in a win is because some of these things that have shown up in this loss are things that were evident in the wins and they're not getting fixed. So that traces back to the whole discussion of, it goes all the way up to the top. I tweeted, I think to put it best, leadership seems to be asleep at the wheel right now. And I'm hopeful that the Texans leadership at all levels will wake up. And we're going to find out a lot when the trade deadline goes down. And I want to say I'm excited to see the Texans play the Lions, but I mean, full disclosure, on all our preview episodes moving forward, I'm going to have trouble seeing myself give the Texans a dub outside of the Titans games. I mean, I feel like those two are pretty easily Texans wins, but we'll see.
Hold on. They're definitely beating the Cowboys. I'll do that right now.
Oh, yeah. Cowboys. Yeah. No. Okay. So for most of the game, not
the Cowboys don't even want to play.
I don't know what's going on in Dallas, but I'll tell you this: there's a certain someone that needs to enter his afterlife before the Cowboys could consider contending again. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks for tuning into this edition of the Bullpen. If you're looking for a preview episode, we'll have a preview episode out for the Texans-Lions matchup, so make sure you tune into that. We do lives sometimes. We haven't done them recently because I'm not in my normal setup, just had a kid, so kind of my paternity era. But we will get back to doing lives at some point, so make sure you're staying tuned for that. I got this hat from Fitted Dad on Instagram. I like to shout him out because I really like the hat. It's really nice. And speaking of Instagram, if you follow me at N1 Texans Fan on Instagram, make sure you're subscribing. It's $1 a month. I just announced the winner for the giveaway this month. They got a CJ Stroud jersey. As you can imagine, the more people that are involved in the subscription, the larger prizes I can give away. So I'd really appreciate you getting on over there and dropping the $1 a month to be a part of it. And yeah, I have been James Roy, and like I said, my Instagram is N1 Texans Fan. You can find me at James Roy NFL on Twitter. Tom is at Third Coast Tom on Twitter and at TC Tom1 on Instagram. And the bullpen is at the Bullpen Cast. And we have been the bullpen. So thanks for tuning in. As always, stay classy, Houston, and vamos Texans. Thanks for tuning into The Bullpen, a Texans podcast. Please like, comment, subscribe, and follow along for more Texans talk from The Bullpen.